project, and I work towards the same. And so today I will be talking about the basics of blockchain, the threat landscape about it, and also giving a brief about two of my personal projects. So that will give a very clear understanding about how exactly a blockchain is structured, how exactly it works, and going through it on a very basic level. So I will begin my presentation. I hope my screen is visible right now.
No.
It's not.
Not yet.
Yeah. Screen too. Is it visible now? I have that message saying it's sharing.
No. Yeah. Now it's yes.
It's there? Okay.
Yeah. Maybe you might have switched to your PPT.
Yeah. So, yeah. So today I'll be talking about blockchain and specifically about its cyberspace and its the threats that it faces and how blockchain as a technology and as other various other tools combined with it overcome these particular threats that are so the vulnerabilities aren't exposed and the user data remains safe in a blockchain environment. So firstly, what is a blockchain? A blockchain is basically going to be a distributed and decentralized ledger. And the way it stores data is it is going to be within a series of blocks. And each block will have a bunch of data that is going to be specific to that particular use case. And generally, it will be a transactional data, as you might know about Bitcoin or Ethereum. And the transaction might contain things like the transaction amount, the goods, the timestamp, of course, and your public key. So these are all the details that we contain within it. And along with this, there will be a hash of the previous block that will also be a part of the current block. Why this is done is that in order to link two blocks together, we will have to have some sort of a common data. And now here there's a very specific reason why we are going with the previous block's hash. And that is it will create an avalanche effect down the line. So consider there is a block right now, and it has a hash called hash1. All the contents of this block, including hash1, are hashed, and now you have a new hash. This new hash will become block two's previous hash. And when we compute the hash of block two, it will in turn have the hash of block one. Now it will have the contents of block two as well hashed within it. So over a period of time, each and every single block will be a part of will be containing the historical data right from the genesis. And by genesis, I mean the very first block. And since each of these are linked together in the form of a chain, it is called a blockchain. And why should we use a blockchain? What are the advantages compared to the existing systems? So the first and foremost reason is the records are immutable. Why would I say the records are immutable? The reason being that, as I mentioned about the avalanche effect, whenever you want to try and edit any kind of data, what happens is once you have a hash computed, whenever you change any amount of data, even if it's just one bit that has been changed, the entire hash has to be recomputed because the hash is not going to be similar. That is the whole reason why we go ahead with cryptographic hashes. And the most commonly used one is a SHA-256 hash. And once let's say you change of the fifth block in the chain of 100 blocks, what happens now is that you will have to now recompute all the remaining 95 blocks ahead of this one, because all of them were cryptographically linked to this fifth block. This makes it computationally infeasible to make any modifications to any data that has been added to the chain. And as time goes on, as more and more blocks are added, the security and the immutability just increases. And the same way, the data also becomes very secure, and it is a trustless system. meaning there is no centralized governing authority that you have to look at. And what happens is, let's take the example of a bank. Now, when you want to transact any kind of money, you will have to trust the bank to handle your data, right? But coming to a blockchain, a cryptocurrency based system, you don't have to trust any individual person. It is a distributed system that is owned by the people. And all of your data, despite being open, is secured cryptographically. Everything is hashed, everything is anonymous, yet open. And uh, all the miners, as we call them in the blockchain environment, are incentivized to verify and validate data and to keep it secure and to keep it in the open without having to trust any single person. This data that I'm talking about will be verified by not one person, not two people, but the entire network. So the network takes care of every single other person in the network itself. This is the foundation of the trustless system. And so I'll talk about the structure of blocks now. As I was saying previously, you have the particular data. Along with it, of course, you'll have a timestamp that is to tell that when the block was generated. The last hash, as you can see over here, will be the hash that will be the hash of the previous block. Now, this hash is computed using these three details, and that this will now be the last hash of this particular block. Here again, the hash will be computed using these three details, which will indirectly contain these three details as well. And now this will be used forward. This is how each and every single block will be cryptographically linked down the line. And I have a small sample code to show regarding this. So here I have created a very small and easy blockchain program. And I'll just take a couple of minutes to explain this to understand better. So here I have a class block that is going to have data, last hash, and the current hash. For simplicity purposes, for now, I have ignored the timestamp, but this is a very essential part of any live blockchain system. So whenever I want to create a block, I will be passing the data, the previous hash, and as well as the computed hash. So next, I have a class of the blockchain class. This is where I'll be creating my main blockchain. The one main requirement of any blockchain is that when I create the very first block, there will be no last hash because there is no block that can exist prior to this. This is called the Genesis block, and this will always be predefined in any network. This needs to be predefined so that the first block that is created in the network has a previous hash, which will be this one. So here I have created this Genesis block using some dummy data. That is how it always is, even in live systems. And I have initialized the chain with this. The chain is nothing but an array of blocks. As you can see, I have strongly typed the whole thing here. So now this is the Genesis block. And I have a hash function over here. And again, for simplicity purposes, all I have done is I'm appending a star to this particular data that I'll be passing into it. And add block is nothing but I'm going to call this and pass some data over here. Last hash will be taken by going to the previous block and taking its hash, which will be returned from here. And that particular one will be pushed in. So this is the code I have written. And if I run this, this is the data that I'll be obtaining. Here you can see very clearly because I added data 1, data 2, and data 3 in 3 separate blocks. Here, there's the Genesis one, that was the initial block. And if you come to data with this one, data 1, one very interesting thing happens. The hash that you see over here is data 1 and then gen hash and then a star. This is the exact function that I have written over here to return the block data plus the star. And if you come to this block 2, the one with data 2, here you can see that the hash has data 2, data 1, gen hash, and 2 stars. So now this indirectly became linked not only with its previous block, but also with all the prior blocks, right up till the Genesis block. The same can be observed for this one as well. That is data 3. So this is a very simple way to understand blockchain and how exactly each block is linked with the previous one.
Excuse me, I was dropped out, so I
Yes,
really
sir.
don't know. Is it this is really related to a smart contract or something, or is it the code you're showing? Is it related to Bitcoin scripting, or is it related to uh, what a
No,
smart
sir.
contract?
This is not related to Bitcoin or smart contract yet. I'll be giving demos on that further in the presentation. This is just to give an idea about how the basic structure of a blockchain will be, to explain how the hashes will be linked to each previous block.
Okay, this you're designing your blockchain, your coding, is it?
Yes, yes. This is my own
Okay, that's
demo.
what I want. Okay.
Yeah. So I will now proceed with my presentation. Okay, so now let's talk about Bitcoin, which is the most famous blockchain right now, I can say, because recently I think the value of one Bitcoin went up to 16.5 lakhs, or sorry, 24.5 lakhs. So it's a very valuable one, I might say. Okay, so how did Bitcoin come into existence? It was from a group of individuals or an individual. And honestly speaking, nobody knows. They have a white paper published under the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. And this was the point where the blockchain revolution actually started. Everyone started talking about blockchain. It became a hot topic. And the reason being, it introduced this trustless system using a proof of work consensus algorithm. Now, what does a consensus algorithm mean? A consensus algorithm is nothing but the way in which any block that is to be added into the blockchain is verified by all the nodes in the network. And one main feature of using this proof of work, and to avoid many other issues that I'll be explaining soon, is that the transactions in a blockchain, in a Bitcoin blockchain, are timestamped. The present time at which the block is being created is always taken into account. Now, where does this come into picture? I will come to that soon. So now let's talk about the proof of work consensus algorithm. In a proof of work consensus algorithm, what happens is there is a cryptographic problem that the network nodes need to solve. Now, the people who solve this, we call them miners in the network, and that is necessary so that this particular transaction is validated and also verified by many other nodes in the chain, and then added to the chain, because now this blockchain is going to be replicated across all the systems, and all the systems will always be up to sync with all the data that has been added till the present moment. So one person will be validating the data and the others will be verifying this particular person's, that is the miner's validation. How does this happen? There is a difficult but yet computationally significant problem that is given to them to solve, which is a hashing problem. And once this hash is generated, the same is verified because the data is publicly available. And for generating the hash, what happens is there is something called a difficulty. Now, I have mentioned a point here saying the difficulty of the problem is varied based on the increase or decrease in the rate of generation of blocks. So what happens with a real blockchain, let me give you the example of Bitcoin itself over here, is that the rate of generation is limited to one block every 10 minutes. So the moment more blocks are starting to get generated, the rate dips below one block every 10 minutes, the difficulty of computing this hash is increased. And what I mean by difficulty is that when you generate a hash uh, for a particular set of data, what happens is there is a requirement introduced that says, for example, a specific number of zeros that the hash should start with. So if my difficulty is, say, for example, 5, my blockchain should now have, sorry, my hash should now have 5 zeros at the very beginning, and then the rest of the hash can be any number of characters. If more blocks start to get generated, the difficulty level increases, which means the number of zeros at the beginning of the hash have to be more. And in order to compute this more and more specific hash, more and more computational resources are required, which means more time is required. And the same way, if the rate of generation starts decreasing, that is, it goes to one block every, say, 12 minutes, 13 minutes, the network automatically then decreases the difficulty so that the rate of generation is maintained at tried and maintained to be constant at one block every 10 minutes. And also coming to this same thing that I was talking about, the avalanche effect and every block being linked to one another, any change in any block in the middle of the chain or anywhere would require remining of all the subsequent blocks, which would make it computationally infeasible. Because let's say your difficulty is of the order of 20. Your hash needs to have 20 zeros in the beginning and then some. What happens is 20 into, let's say, 100 blocks is to be mined now. This becomes infeasible for you to mine. And anyway, when you do this, because you don't have control of the network, these are going to be invalidated. So any attack in a straightforward way, as we know it, will be rendered unusable. It will be a waste of time for the attacker, and the system security will be maintained.
Continue, sir. Continue, sir.
Ganesh, you're not audible.
Hello, am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not sure how I got muted. Did I go through a lot of things before this?
Maybe the previous one.
Previous slide. All right, sure.
Previous slide.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Okay. So there is a major problem that may be encountered in a Bitcoin blockchain that is called the 51% attack problem. What happens here is that if an attacker or a group of attackers collectively own, say, 51% or more, that is the majority of the computing power of the entire blockchain network, then theoretically it is possible that they can control the transactions. They can control what transactions are to be added to the chain, what blocks are to be discarded, And they can also potentially block some other miners from mining, because since they have the higher computational power, they will generate the block, they will generate the next block, and since now they have the longer chain, they are going to say that this miner's block will be discarded. And this can also give rise to a mining monopoly. But the practical aspect of this is that this is not a feasible thing to do. The reason being that 51% of the entire blockchain network today amounts to almost 8 billion or more US dollars. And even if it was financially feasible, if you control the blockchain in such a way, you cannot change the block reward because that is still maintained by the entire network. And you also cannot create you cannot create coins. The coins always have to be a block reward. The only thing that can be controlled is whatever blocks are generated further down the line. Those transactions can probably be blocked, and some miners can be prevented from mining on those blocks. But again, having an attack where you modify the details of some particular block in the middle of the chain and then rehash every other block for down the line is going to make it very computationally infeasible, is one thing. And the second thing is, in such a network, your worth will drastically drop down, and the whatever new transactions are to be made, they cannot be stopped because it is still going to be operated by the remaining 49% of the network. So the 51% attack problem is a very rare and theoretically hypothesized attack, but such an attack cannot happen in a Bitcoin blockchain, since it already has a very large consumer base, and any attacker, when they have such an investment, they can benefit more by going ahead with regular hashing and being a loyal user as opposed to being an attacker, because being an attacker will involve having more computational resources for lesser rewards. Another problem that is again theorized is a double spending problem. So in a physical transaction, when let's say you are at a shop near a cashier, you have a note. You can spend that note only once. You give the cashier some money, you take your goods, and that's it. That's the end of the transaction. With digital transactions, it's slightly different. It is possible that once you initiate a transaction data, which is broadcasted everywhere, before this transaction is validated by all the nodes, before this block is mined and added to the blockchain, you or another node may rebroadcast this particular transaction. And since in neither of the places the amount is spent, this will give rise to the case of a double spending problem. That is, you will be able to spend the same money twice. But this is again tackled by the Bitcoin blockchain. And here is where the timestamp comes into picture. So what happens is, when a hash is generated, the hash for that particular block will also involve the timestamp. When you want to rebroadcast the block, the timestamp will obviously have to change if you want to make it into a different transaction. Now, when you make it into a different transaction, since the timestamp changes and even the data changes, the block's hash has to be recomputed because the existing hash will be invalid and that block will be invalidated by the network. And if you change the block's hash and which in turn will also change the timestamp and the other data as well, what happens is now this becomes a separate block. Here, now the link will be made between which was the previous block it is linked to. And if another block is already being added to the chain at this moment, then your particular transaction will have to wait until that is completed and then linked with that previous hash. So this particular double spending problem is countered by having a simple timestamp into a timestamp appended into every single block. And this issue it's made sure that you cannot double spend anything, and the double spent transaction, if any, will be invalidated by the network. And the reason we need such a method is that, let's say we have a bank transaction. In a bank transaction, what happens is you have a mediator who is going to control all this. But in a distributed environment, there is no mediator. And if we want to involve a centralized authority, the whole point of having a blockchain, a decentralized system, is uh, basically it's a counter argument to that system itself. So using a timestamp server is how this particular problem is tackled in the Bitcoin blockchain. And there are some other threats as well in a blockchain environment. Some of them are the ones I mentioned here. So let me briefly talk about these as well. Routing attack. So what happens in a routing attack is that the traffic is hijacked. And what I mean by hijacked is it is populated so much that your requests will now have to be routed elsewhere. Places, and these need not be nodes where it is intended to route to. So what happens is this can give rise to man-in-the-middle type of attacks, wherein it can be probably made sure that the requests will, with a certain probability, land up to a particular node, which is a malicious node, which will then play the role for a man-in-the-middle attack. But this type of attack won't be successful if the hacker does not have a full control of the blockchain network and all the computational resources. So due to these reasons, again, these routing attacks, even though they can be done, they will not impact the functioning of the network as well as the security of your data and the validity of your data. Sybil attacks is something like a social media troll. So just the way a social media troll will have multiple accounts where they start posting different content in order to gain attention to their particular content, no matter from where it's coming. Similarly, a Sybil attack is where an attacker has multiple accounts on the blockchain in order to deceive other blockchain participants. So preventing Sybil attacks is quite straightforward, as in you will have to make sure that you are sending your wallet funds to the right wallet address. And this issue is mainly going to be present in your public networks. In case of permissioned or private blockchains, since the members are clearly identified and permissioned into the blockchain, you do not have the use of wallets, and hence civil attacks are not present in such environments. DDoS attacks.
So Ganesh, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt.
Yes.
Yeah, in routing attack, maybe we can say that the BGP hijacking attack is much related to that, because the attackers will create a malicious reroute to the traffic, so that the nodes which are going to be joined into the blocks, particularly in the chain,
Mm-hmm.
they will take another route so that they can form a new orphan chain, and then they will connect to the block. Isn't it like that, sir?
Correct, sir. So that is the intent behind it. But what happens is usually when that will be zoned into a particular region of the network, whereas the rest of the network will still be going ahead with creating other blocks. And since there is this longest chain rule, this particular orphan chain has the maximum probability of being ruled out because it is coming from a very small number of participants as compared to the rest of the entire blockchain.
Correct.
Yes. So because of that, this orphan chain will not be accepted into the main chain, and these transactions will, in the end, be invalidated.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes. So then another type of attack that is probable in this is a DDoS attack. DDoS attack is a very commonly known attack. I mean, this is an existing thing in our regular web security as well. Basically the very same thing can occur in a blockchain network where a node or a group of nodes can be bombarded with many thousands and millions of requests such that they are now blocked processing all of this, and then they cannot participate in the network as active as they were. So the goal is generally to slow down and crash the entire system in case of DDoS attacks. But in a blockchain system, since it is distributed across like many thousands and millions of nodes, a DDoS attack can be localized to a few nodes, but it will never be strong enough to ever bring down the entire network. The network is redundant that way to DDoS attacks by its distributed nature. So these common threats that are seen every day are basically the blockchain system is where like mostly immune to such threats. And so going ahead, now I'll be talking about a very interesting blockchain platform that has come up in the past few years. This is the Ethereum platform. And why do I say it is interesting? Is because it is not just a blockchain platform for your regular transactions. We already have Bitcoin for that. But Ethereum, it introduces a decentralized software platform. If you have by any chance heard of DApps, distributed applications. Distributed applications are basically your interactive applications similar to say the mini application PWAs and all that you encounter in your website. But now these are not hosted anywhere. These are applications or programs that are running on the blockchain network itself. And any kind of transactions that have to take place through these distributed applications now have a new thing introduced called smart contracts. So what are smart contracts? Smart contracts are similar to your regular pen and paper contracts, where you have two parties signing an agreement for a mutual benefit. Smart contracts do the same without having to involve a middle party who will ensure that these agreements are looked after. There is no middleman that you will have to trust in case of a smart contract. The two or multiple parties that are there that are going to be the part of the smart contract will have a contract written down, which is going to automatically run on the blockchain. And as and when the relevant data is fed to the contract, the next steps are going to take place. And all of these steps will be recorded on the blockchain and verified by every single node in the blockchain. So this again becomes immutable data that cannot be altered, which is a very big benefit over your existing contract system, where if the middleman is not trustable, then many times it happens that we get cheated out of certain things. There are small sub clauses and things like that. So many of those things can be avoided since everything is automated, and the entire network is going to validate this. And one more main point is that instead of using a proof of work algorithm, now Ethereum has introduced something called a proof of stake consensus. The reason being that in proof of work, as I had mentioned about the difficulty, mining in Bitcoin took over, like it had a big craze around the world, around the entire world. And the number of miners increased to such an extent that in order to maintain the 1 block per 10 minutes rate, the difficulty increased to such an extent that it was estimated that create the amount of computational power that gets consumed into creating 1 block is enough to power about 1.5 an average American household for 1 entire day. That is how much computational power was getting used. So it was not a very efficient way of doing it, because in order to decentralize and basically make it a trustless system, what we were now facing is an energy issue. Proof of stake consensus, however, will not disturb this in such a way, because it depends on how much stake is held by a person in a particular network. So let's say a particular node has about 3% of the Ethereum in that network. So now this particular node can hash only 3% of all the transactions, 3% of all the blocks that are created, and this will again be verified with the rest of the network. So your block computational power, your block computation, the hash computation is not going to be as expensive of an operation as in the case of Bitcoin. And at the same time, it is going to ensure that, like it was there in the case of the 51% attack, in case of the 51% attack in Ethereum, if a person owns 51% of the network, yes, they will be now able to hash 51% of all the blocks that are going to be created. But by being malicious in this, it will just crash the value of the ether, which will result in a big loss for the attacker himself. So having so the 51% attack is not an attack on the network, but rather an attack on the attacker himself, because they will end up in huge losses because they will be the reason the value of the ether will tank. So there is no reason to have such a control over this particular network, because you cannot profit from it anyway, which is what is the intention behind attacking such things. So that is mainly about Ethereum and its consensus, that is proof of stake consensus, and how it's beneficial over the proof of work consensus in Bitcoin blockchain. Now let's talk about the second most important thing about Ethereum blockchain, that is a smart contract. So as I had previously mentioned, smart contracts are just your regular program. It's basically like a regular program which is stored on the blockchain, and they are automatically executed when whatever conditions were determined prior by the agreeing parties, these particular conditions are met. They will enforce agreements without involving any intermediate parties, because again, this is a decentralized system, and because it being a decentralized and trustless system, we do not need any middleman over here. Now let me give you the example. Let me give you two examples over here. One will be, let's say you are trying to purchase a car, and most buyers will generally take cars on loans. So now what happens is, in order to get financing, there are now three participants involved. One is the vendor, one is obviously the buyer, and one is the money lender. Now, in order to in a regular existing system, what happens is you will now have to individually deal with the bank, have a person come over, them signing the documents. Now you have to trust this person to handle your documents and accordingly dispatch the money. And this money will now have to be given by you to the showroom guy, and it's a very extensive process. What happens in case of a smart contract is the buyer, the showroom, and the bank as a lender, they can have a smart contract by discussing among themselves, which will now basically simplify the process. And how this will simplify the process is that as soon as the bank releases the fund, the buyer will now have the fund. The smart contract can be made to state that as soon as there is funds collected in this person's wallet, send it to the showroom so that this particular transaction is now completed. And also, in the same step, the car can now be dispatched to the user, the buyer, and the car's title can be made in the name of the bank, which will automatically down the line, once the repayment is completed, be transferred to the buyer's name. And all of this is happening within that one single contract by having just these three parties involved and no middlemen to handle any of these, to handle any paperwork as we do in the existing system. So this simplifies this entire process by multiple folds. And since it is automating this entire process, this for each particular step that happens, a transaction is created, and this particular transaction is now validated and stored on the blockchain, like for any other regular transaction. And the validation happens from the entire network. So now this record is something that cannot be changed. It is extremely difficult to make any changes to this record and basically to cheat any one of the involved parties. That is a very infeasible process, and this ensures that all of this happens smoothly without having any middleman involved. This is how the smart contract is beneficial, and this is the evolution of blockchain from the Bitcoin blockchain, which compared to this we can say is primitive. And now these smart contracts can be used in such ways to simplify many processes that we have. This car is just one example. I can give you another example. So this was a project that I had created in my final year of engineering. This was for supply chain management of pharmaceuticals using blockchain. So let me just bring this code over here. So as you can see here, I have a few smart contracts. So one here is for the orders, one is for the users. Users is nothing but just the number of users who are going to be there in the blockchain, which is a very simple use case. Orders is where it will be handling the orders between, say, in a supply chain, the manufacturer and the distributor. So here I have rigged up a demo blockchain using Truffle. Truffle is a suite that provides many tools for Ethereum smart contract development. So I will just migrate the smart contracts onto this test network. And here you can see that there were blocks created, there were transactions created for each particular migration as well. So here you can see the particular transaction hash that was created, the gas price that is used for Ethereum. This is gas price is something that is unique to Ethereum, and it is measured in the terms of GUI. And the total cost again over here will be mentioned in the ethers that have been spent. So this is for one migration of the contract. This is for the user and order registry. And now we have total 3 deployments. So now we have 3 blocks created in the network. So let me just show you this particular thing. I'm sorry, I think I have to start this network. So here is the particular smart contract that I have written in order to handle the orders and the communication between 2 entities in a supply chain. So here, as you can see, this is just like any other simple program where there are functions, you pass in a few parameters, then certain details are returned. And using these smart contracts is how you would interact with the blockchain to get or set any of the details. To, even if you have to get the transaction and extract certain details from it, all of that will happen through a smart contract itself in Ethereum. So yeah, this is up and running. I can show you this. Okay. So this is one entity, and let me just open up for the manufacturer. Okay, so as you can see over here, now I can request. This is a very basic interface that I had created in order to experiment with blockchain. So here, let's say I select some product, enter some quantity. I had made it such that the price can be automatically calculated and the date can be set to any future date for the shipment. And I can submit this. The moment I submit this, it says request created along with the entire transaction ID for this particular transaction. Now, the distributor generally requests products from the manufacturer in a supply chain. So if we come to the manufacturer, you can see it says new order received with that particular code that was EBC6. You can see the product name, the price, the quantity, all of this is there. And if I create this, now I have successfully made 2 transactions, one for requesting and one for sending the shipment. Now this can be viewed over here. These 2 are my particular transactions. And these details can now be obtained in the blockchain by interacting either directly with the console or by doing it through the way of the smart contract. Now, if I want to do it through the way of the console, as we had seen, the block number was 6. So if I say Ethereum dot get block and the number is 6, I get this entire block details where I get this transaction hash, which you can verify as being the same as this particular hash over here. And subsequently, all the remaining details, that is the nonce, the total price that was sent for the particular transaction, the SHA hash sums, the difficulty in mining this, and all of these details are now returned to you, along with the most important, one of the most important things, that is the timestamp. This will be automatically generated. So for any subsequent blocks, now this is how this is done, so that all the transactions in the supply chain are now recorded on this immutable ledger. So what happens in this case is that the accountability in the entire supply chain system increases. If there was any loss of materials in a supply chain, tracing that back would take quite a long time. It will take, the general lead time is about 2 to 3 weeks in any mid-sized corporate. But here, your accountability comes down to a couple of hours at max, because you will get to know exactly where, what happened, which transaction was completed. And now, let's say the distributor now has the product, the distributor hasn't sent this to anyone, and there was, say, a loss of products. Now, the distributor cannot blame it on the transport, because when we generate the hash, all those details are now kept on the blockchain. You can see exactly what all products came, and it can be made such that you know in what condition they arrive. And all of these details, once they are kept, now the accountability comes down to the distributor, and you can now pinpoint and say that this particular node in my supply chain has the problem. So management of the entire supply chain becomes multiple folds easier when you adopt a blockchain system as opposed to a regular existing system, where verifying and where one main problem, apart from the verification and the lead time to get to any particular to pinpoint any location on the supply chain, is it's based on a trust-based system. Here, there is no trust. Everyone is accountable for themselves, because all of their data, how they have handled the particular products, everything will be now stored on the blockchain, as you can see here, with all of the data that is returned. So this is how a blockchain would benefit, not only in the case of a transaction where I had given an example of purchasing a car where multiple parties are involved, but even such cases where an entire multinational conglomerate can have all of its details, all of its supply chain details kept on one single blockchain. And the beauty of this is that it is very easily scalable. And if this is maintained as a consortium blockchain, we don't need to have any particular way to we don't need to have any particular way to track down anyone, and to like, there is no extensive procedure involved in order to find out if anything is going wrong anywhere in the entire supply chain. The accountability increases multiple folds. That is the main advantage of a blockchain, and it is highly scalable, because existing systems, you'll have to hire a bunch of more people. You'll have to trust those people to give the accurate information. All of this will be eliminated in the blockchain very efficiently and in a very scalable way, so that you don't have to face any problems down the line thinking that, okay, I had designed this for a mid-sized system, now I need a large-sized system. That problem will not be there in the blockchain. Okay, so let me start presentation. Yeah. Okay, so coming to the smart contracts security. This is one major issue in smart contracts. They have to be highly secure. There was one major incident that had happened with respect to smart contracts. There was a DAO. A DAO is a distributed asset organization. There was one particular German company that had named their online presence as the DAO. and they had faced an issue with this particular thing, that is reentrancy. A reentrancy attack is one where basically the attacker can continuously call upon a function within the smart contract multiple times until there is a Stack Overflow exception, and this is harmful in a multitude of ways. So let me give the real example, the real story of what had happened. So this particular DAO, it had had a fundraiser, and in this particular fundraiser, they had requested people to send them donations through Ethereum. They had written a smart contract to accept this particular amounts, whatever is being sent. And once any amount is received at any point of time, they could trigger a function within the smart contract called withdraw ETH, that's withdraw the ethers, and withdraw the money. Now, one problem that they hadn't considered is that when we have like an attacker, what had happened is he had created another smart contract which would first send a donation to this, then call the withdraw ether method. Now, until here, it is fine. But what happens is now this donation had a fallback function that will be executed as soon as the donation is completed, which will have to now withdraw the ethers and it will change the account details. And this will be done continuously after one donation is received into this particular smart contract until a Stack Overflow exception occurs. So all of the money that had not been withdrawn, that was stored on the Ethereum wallet, can now be directly taken into the attacker's wallet, which is exactly what had happened in this particular case. Now there were a bunch of let's say not so good practices that were involved over here, which is that they had kept only one account to accept their funds and all. But still, this highlights a very important very important condition in creation of smart contracts, and that is the reason this kind of attack even got successful is because once a request is made before the smart contract is updated, the fallback function was being executed to withdraw the funds. So before even updating the attacker's balance, the withdraw is getting successful over and over and over until the network's capacity or the particular node's capacity is reached. So this is one main issue that has to be kept in mind when designing any smart contract, and that is updation of your smart contract should occur just prior to having any such function that is executing. Because the moment you have something executing like this and your contract is not updated, this particular transaction is still in progress, and the rest of the account details, since they are unchanged, they are now susceptible to a lot of attacks, which will then also render this particular transaction into your system invalid, but can transfer the funds into an attacker's wallet. So this was one major incident that happened. And apart from this, there's also another issue that can occur in smart contracts. That is the case of an underflow. Now, what happens in an underflow is that Ethereum, the Ethereum virtual machine, it is designed to use 256 bits as its total word size. And this, since it is defined as an unsigned integer, it doesn't have an overflow or an underflow condition. So once you go beyond the 256 bit size, that is 2 power 56, the range is then reset to
Ganesh,
0. Yes.
Ganesh, I have one question related to reentrancy attack. So
Yes,
my
sir,
question is that does reentrancy attack can also analyze the contracts that are not vulnerable as confirmed by the true negative rate?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question, sir?
My question is, sir, does the reentrancy attack can also analyze the contracts that are not vulnerable and as they have confirmed by the true negative rate?
Reentrancy attack can be used to verify the security of contracts that are not vulnerable to this.
Because the RA attack can precisely verify all the existing vulnerabilities which are there in the smart contract without false positive and false negative, right, sir? If I'm not
Correct,
wrong.
sir. Yes.
So that's my question relates to that only, that does it analyze the contract that are also not vulnerable? So my question is a bit confusing, but it has some points.
Yes. So what you're trying to basically ask is whether it can analyze all the contracts irrespective of their vulnerabilities. Correct? Yes. A reentrancy script can be written to test the security of your smart contracts and basically give you a whole list of all the vulnerabilities, which may or may not, when reentrancy may or may not be one of the vulnerabilities in this, but that can definitely be given to you by having some script or some smart contract verification tool running on that. I hope I have answered you.
That means whenever we talk about the tokens, the token is based on the cross function reentrancy attack and its code length, right? With respect to with the variation of function call which are very large. And thus, with the help of RA, we can still analyze the token with reasonable amount of time. That's the I'm talking about in terms of computation with respect to GPUs.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm still learning about all this, so I'll try and get back to you on this particular doubt. But right now, I'm still learning about this. I'm not exactly aware of that.
I have tried to implement that RA attack on a similar kind of scenario using GPUs by using cloud resources only. So successfully I did that, but I'm not able to identify the vulnerability which are there in a regular contract. Okay, sir. No, continue, sir.
Yeah, I'll definitely get back to you on this one, sir. Please pass me your contact details. Like right now, I'm still learning about this. I'm not aware of this, but I'll surely get back to you.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so coming back to the underflow attack. So what happens in underflow is that there is no upper limit or lower an overflow or underflow condition defined for an unsigned integer in the EVM. So the moment you exceed 2 power 56, that is the 256 bit size, your range is automatically set back to 0. Same happens when you go below 0, it will be set back to the highest limit, that is the 2 power 56. And using this, there can be an underflow attack that can be created. So the attacker might initiate an attack by sending, say, an amount of 1 GWI, that is 1 gas price, to a particular target contract. Now the contract will credit the sender for the funds sent, and the transaction is created, and a subsequent withdrawal of the same 1 GWI is called. And the contract will now subtract the 1 GWI from the sender's credit. So the balance is now 0. From 1 GWI, it went to 0. Now, because the target contract sends Ether to the attacker can have a fallback function, which will trigger the withdrawal again. Again, now 1 GWI is sent out. And because the balance of the attacker's contract has been updated twice, first time to 0 and the second to -1, the attacker's balance is now temporarily reset to 2 power 256. That is the highest range, because it went to an underflow and now it went to the highest value. The attacker can now completely withdraw all of this funds from the of the targeted contract, and this is basically a kind of a spam attack, because this is a temporary underflow condition that is caused in the EVM. Now, this can be avoided by making sure you use the right data bit. So these issues were like a little prevalent in the initial phases of smart contract development. But now, since more and more flaws are being discovered, we can now basically have different conditions. We can try going towards assigned bit. We can have the data restriction. We can have restriction on the updation of the smart contract, as with the case of reentrancy attack. So using all of these issues can be countered. But these are very important issues to be kept in mind, because these can result in quite major losses if one is not careful when deploying smart contracts to the main Ethereum network. So this has been my presentation about the generally used public blockchains, that's Bitcoin and Ethereum, and the threat landscapes for the same, covering most of the major kinds of threats and how they can be countered, or how the blockchain itself handles those particular threats. So thank you for tuning to my presentation. And if there are any questions, then please do ask.
Yeah. Ganesh, there are some questions.
Yes, sir, sure.
Is there any open source tool for analyzing smart contracts vulnerabilities?
Yes, there are several tools that will do that. One famous one that I know is of Truffle. So there's a tool called Truffle that will provide an entire suite of development tools for Ethereum smart contract development. So apart from development, it also provides quick testing and deployment tools as well. So using those, also smart contract vulnerabilities can be assessed.
Okay. Participants are requesting for your mail ID where they can contact you.
So there is one more tool which is specifically used for analyzing the malicious input in a smart contract, which is ECHIDNA. ECHIDNA.
Yeah, sir.
Any other questions, participants? Anything else? Okay. If there are no questions, Ganesh, thank you very much for giving this demonstration and also giving the details about blockchain. And I would like to tell participants that he is our proud alumni. And this project was again was one of the best project that got selected in our project demonstrations. And I hope participants have got some information on whatever Ganesh has shared with. Thank you, Ganesh, for
Sir, can I ask a question?
and accepting our
Sir,
invitation.
Sir, can I ask? Hello.
Yeah, please, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Mr. Ganesh, thank you so much. It was really because we are very old in the system, but the way you have made us understand.
I think ma'am went on.
Yeah, Kavita ma'am, we are not able to hear you. I think there is some problem.
So Naveen sir, is it?
She has raised her hand. Do you have any question?
Yes, Mr. Ganesh, hello.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, good afternoon. Actually, the way you have beautified the session in a simpler words, it has refreshed all of the things again. I have many things to ask, but you don't have so much of time. Can I have your email ID so that I can communicate you on that and get my doubts clear? Can we have your
Definitely,
email?
ma'am. Definitely, I'll just ping my email ID in the meeting chat itself. So if anyone wants to contact me regarding anything, then you can.
Communicating with you so that we can have more doubts cleared. Thank you, sir. Thank you
Definitely,
so much.
ma'am. Thank you for the kind words.
So Naveen sir, whether there is any plans to share the slides or through PDF or something like that, or?
Yes, I will be doing it by today evening, sir. Yesterday's
sure.
video sessions and PDFs, means in the sense PPT, I have requested the experts. Once they share it to me, immediately I will put it across.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And we all will meet at 2:15 today, 2:30. Mr. Raj Kapoor, who is really very good in this blockchain area. Afternoon, we will be spending our time with him, with listening to all his expert lectures. I request all of you to join at 2:15, 2:30 exact. We have to start the session. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Sir, only one question, sir. Next
Yeah.
3 days, the same 3 times will be followed, sir.
Yes.
Same schedule. 10 o'clock,
Yeah,
12
it is the
o'clock
same.
after the 2:15.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And the
Okay,
complete
sir.
schedule is available in the website. The speaker
Yes, sir.
details, everything. And now for tomorrow's also, I have shared the links. So you can join. You can take it up.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Today's feedback link, everything. I'll be doing it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We'll
Thank you.
meet at 2:15 again. Thank you all.
2:15.
2:15. Yeah.
Thank
2:30
you.
is the next session.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
sir.
sir.
I'd like to thank
Thank you,
everyone
Ganesh.
for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ganesh. Bye.
Bye, sir.